The morning sky over Seoul looked normal, but Captain Hyun-woo Kim knew something was wrong. His hand shook as he stared at the computer screen in the Earth Defense Station. The signals coming from deep space were unlike anything he had ever seen. They moved in patterns that showed clear intelligence behind them. Hyun-woo had been watching the stars for 20 years. He knew the difference between space rocks and real signals. This was something alive out there. Something smart. Something coming toward Earth very fast. He pressed the red button on his desk. Alarms rang through the station. Officers came running from every direction. Lieutenant Minho Park was first through the door. He was young but good at his job. Behind him came Dr. So-young Park. She studied space life and had been waiting her whole career for this moment. The object on their screens was huge, bigger than any city on Earth. It moved through space faster than anything humans had ever built. Its shape was strange and beautiful, like a flower made of silver light that bent and twisted as it flew. Down on Earth, people were dying. The Vorthak plague had been killing everything for 3 long years. It started with plants. Grass turned black and died. Trees fell over with their roots rotting. Then animals began getting sick. Birds fell from the sky. Fish died in rivers and oceans. Now people were dying too. Dr. Yoonji Choi worked in her lab, in Busan trying to find a cure. She had not slept for 2 days straight. Her eyes were red and her hands moved without stopping. She mixed chemicals and tested samples, but nothing worked. The plague was too smart. Every time she thought she found an answer, it changed itself and got stronger. Outside her window, she could see the city getting empty. People packed their cars and tried to drive somewhere safe. But there was nowhere to go. The plague followed them everywhere they went. Farms stopped growing food. Hospitals ran out of beds. The government said everything would be okay, but everyone knew they were lying. The strange object in space suddenly stopped moving. It hung in the darkness like a new star. Captain Hyun-woo watched through his best telescope. The surface of the ship seemed to glow with its own light. The metal looked smooth like water but solid like stone. Beautiful patterns moved across, its surface like living art. Then the message came. Every radio on Earth began playing the same voice at the same time. Every television screen showed the same words. The voice spoke perfect Korean even though it clearly was not human. It sounded old and wise and kind. People of Earth, we have been watching your world for many years. We see that you are in great danger. A terrible sickness is destroying all life on your planet. We have come to help you if you will allow us to. Do so. Dr. So-young Park dropped her coffee cup when she heard the words. Hot liquid splashed on her shoes, but she did not notice. She had spent 30 years studying the possibility of life beyond Earth. She had written books about what aliens might be like. But hearing their actual voice made her heart beat so fast she thought it might stop. The voice continued speaking. We call ourselves the Arthurians. We come from a star system far from yours. We have seen the plague that is killing your world. It is not natural. Someone sent this sickness to destroy all life on Earth. We do not know who did this terrible thing, but we know how to stop it. President Nam-joon Lee called together all the world leaders for an emergency meeting. They talked through video screens because it was too dangerous to travel anywhere. Some leaders wanted to shoot missiles at the alien ship. They said the strangers might be lying. They might want to hurt Earth. Other leaders said they should ignore the aliens completely. They were afraid of what might happen if they let outsiders onto their planet. What if the aliens wanted to take over their world? What if they wanted to make humans into slaves? But Dr. So-young Park stood up during the meeting. She told them the truth that everyone knew but nobody wanted to say. Humans were losing the fight against the plague. Every day more people died. Every day the sickness spread to new places. Soon there would be nobody left to save. She said they had tried everything human science could do. All their best doctors and scientists had worked for 3 years without finding an answer. Maybe it was time to trust someone who knew more than they did. The alien ship moved closer to Earth but stopped at a safe distance. Small ships came out of the big one like seeds from a flower. These smaller ships landed in empty fields far away from cities. The beings who came out looked almost like humans but not exactly the same. They were taller than most people, Their skin had a soft blue color like the evening sky. Their eyes were larger and seemed to see everything at once. They moved with grace like dancers. When they smiled, their faces showed real kindness. The first Althurian to meet humans face-to-face was named Veltar. He came to a medical center in Tokyo, where Dr. So Young Park was waiting. She was so nervous her hands would not stop shaking. But when Veltar smiled at her, she felt calm for the first time in months. Veltar brought with him a small device no bigger than a phone. He showed Dr. Park how it could cure the plague instantly. He found a dying flower in the hospital garden. The petals were black and falling off. He pointed the device at the flower and pressed a button. The flower began to change. The black color faded away. New petals grew bright and healthy. Green leaves sprouted from the stem. In just minutes, the plant looked better than it ever had before. Dr. Park stared with her mouth open. It was like watching magic. Veltar explained that the plague was artificial. Someone had created it as a weapon to destroy worlds. His people had fought against this enemy before on other planets. They had learned how to defeat the plague, but it required knowledge that humans did not have yet. The cure was very complicated. The Althurians would need to build special machines using materials that did not exist on Earth. They would need to create new medicines using science that humans had never seen. It would take many months of hard work. But they promised to teach human scientists everything they needed to know. Dr. Yoonji Choi was chosen to work directly with the Althurian scientists. On her first day in their laboratory, she felt like a child trying to understand adult books. Their knowledge was so far beyond anything she had studied. They understood how life worked at levels she had never imagined. But the Althurians were patient teachers. They showed her how atoms could be changed into different atoms. They taught her how energy could become matter and matter could become energy. They explained how life and death were just different ways for the same force to express itself. More Althurian ships arrived every day. Each one brought new knowledge and new hope. They shared their food when human crops failed completely. They gave humans clean water when all the rivers became poisoned. They provided electricity when power plants stopped working. They asked for nothing in return except friendship between their peoples. The work to create the cure took 8 months. Human and Althurian scientists worked side by side in laboratories that looked like nothing anyone had seen before. The walls seemed to be made of light itself. Machines hummed with power that felt alive. When the cure was finally ready, the Althurians helped spread it across the entire planet. They used devices that could clean the air and water and soil all at the same time. They scattered seeds for new plants that would grow stronger than the ones that had died. They gave medicine to every person on Earth to protect them from getting sick again. Dr. Yoonji Choi watched from her lab window as Busan came back to life. Children ran through streets that had been empty for years. Flowers bloomed in parks where nothing had grown. People sang songs of joy that echoed off the buildings. Markets opened again selling fresh food. Schools welcomed students back to learn. The nightmare was over. Earth was saved. And it was all thanks to strangers from the stars, who had asked for nothing but gave everything they could to help. 5 years had passed since the Althurians saved Earth from the plague. The world looked completely different now. Cities that had been dead were full of life again. New buildings reached toward the sky using materials that seemed to glow with inner light. Gardens bloomed with flowers that never died. Rivers ran clear and clean for the first time in decades. Ambassador Ji-hoon Lee walked through the halls of the United Nations building in New York. Today was special. Today, he would sign the Treaty of Mutual Cooperation between Earth and the Althurian Federation. It would be the first time in human history that they made friends with beings from another world. The Althurian embassy had become the most beautiful building on Earth. It was made of the same glowing materials as their ships. The walls seemed alive with soft light that changed colors like a sunset. People came from around the world just to look at it. Children pressed their faces against the fence trying to see the aliens who lived inside. Dr. So Young Park now worked as the head of the Joint Species Research Program. Every morning she walked to work in the new science complex that humans and Althurians had built together. The laboratories were amazing. They had machines that could look inside atoms. They had computers that thought faster than 1,000 human brains working together. Her Althurian partner was named Zethan. He was old even by Althurian standards. He had been alive for over 300 years and had visited dozens of different worlds. But he told Dr. Park that humans were the most interesting species he had ever met. They learned so fast and asked such good questions. Dr. Yoonji Choi had been promoted to Director of Medical Research. She worked in a building that looked like it was made of crystal and light. The Althurians had taught her things about medicine that seemed like magic. She could cure diseases that had killed people for thousands of years. She could help people live longer and healthier lives than ever before. The best part was that the Althurians shared everything freely. They never asked for money or land or power in return. They said that knowledge belonged to everyone. When one species learned something new, it should help all species become better. Captain Hyun-woo Kim had been given command of Earth's first starship. It was built using both human and Althurian technology. The ship could travel faster than light and visit other star systems. For the first time, humans could explore beyond their own solar system. His crew was made up of both humans and Althurians, working together. Lieutenant Min-ho Park served as his second-in-command. He had learned to speak the Althurian language perfectly. The alien crew members treated him like family. They taught him songs from their homeworld and shared stories of their adventures in space. The ship was called the Harmony. It represented everything good about the friendship between the two species. The hull was made of earth metals strengthened with Althurian science. The engines used human engineering improved with alien knowledge. The computer systems combined the best thinking from both worlds. On their first mission, they visited the Althurian home system. Captain Hyun-woo could not believe what he saw. There were cities floating in space bigger than countries on Earth. Gardens grew on asteroids that had been turned into parks. Ships moved between planets like cars driving through a city. The Althurian government welcomed the human visitors with great celebration. They threw parties that lasted for days. They showed the humans museums full of art from 100 different worlds. They shared food that tasted like nothing anyone had ever imagined. But the most amazing thing was how peaceful everything was. There were no armies or weapons. No one was hungry or homeless. Different species from across the galaxy lived together in harmony. They all worked together to make their worlds better places to live. Dr. Min Seo Song led the first group of human students to study at Althurian universities. The young people were so excited they could barely sleep during the long journey through space. They would learn science and art and philosophy from teachers who had been alive for centuries. The Althurian schools were unlike anything on Earth. Students floated in zero gravity while they learned about physics. They could touch and feel atoms and molecules with special machines. They could travel back in time using virtual reality to see how the universe was born. The human students worked harder than they ever had before. They wanted to make their species proud. They wanted to prove that humans deserved to be friends with such advanced beings. The Althurian teachers were amazed by how quickly the young humans learned. Back on Earth, the changes kept coming. The Althurians helped build power plants that created unlimited clean energy. They showed humans how to grow food in deserts and under the ocean. They taught doctors how to regrow arms and legs that had been lost in accidents. Engineer Dong-hyun Yoon worked on the most ambitious project of all. Humans and Althurians were working together to make Mars into a world where people could live. They were changing the atmosphere and creating oceans and continents. In 50 years, Mars would be as green and beautiful as Earth. The work was hard, but exciting. Every day brought new discoveries. The Althurians had machines that could move mountains and create weather. They could make new kinds of plants that would grow in Martian soil. They could build cities under protective domes that felt like being outside on Earth. Trade between Earth and the Althurian worlds grew every year. Human art and music became popular across the galaxy. Althurian technology made life on Earth better than anyone had ever dreamed. Both species benefited from the friendship. Dr. Jae-hoon Yoo studied how the partnership affected human society. He wrote papers about how contact with aliens had changed the way people thought about life. Humans were no longer alone in the universe. They were part of something much bigger and more wonderful. Crime rates dropped to almost zero. Wars between countries ended because everyone realized how small Earth was compared to the galaxy. People worked together on projects that would take generations to complete. They thought about the future in ways they never had before. The Arthurian influence touched every part of human life. Children grew up learning both human and alien languages. Scientists worked on problems that would have been impossible to solve alone. Artists created new forms of beauty inspired by cultures from distant stars. But perhaps the most important change was in how humans saw themselves. They were no longer just inhabitants of one small planet. They were citizens of the galaxy. They had responsibilities to other species and other worlds. They were part of a community that stretched across the stars. Ambassador Ji-hoon Lee stood at the podium ready to sign the treaty that would make this partnership official. Representatives from both worlds watched as he picked up the pen. This document would guarantee friendship between humans and Arthurians for all time. As he signed his name, Ambassador Lee thought about how much the world had changed. 5 years ago, humanity had been dying. Now they were reaching for the stars. They had been saved by strangers who became friends. They had been given a second chance to be part of something amazing. The treaty was signed with great ceremony. Humans and Arthurians celebrated together in the streets of every city on Earth. Fireworks lit up the sky in colors that had never been seen before. Music from both worlds played from speakers that floated in the air. Dr. So-young Park watched the celebration from her office window. She smiled as she saw human children playing with young Arthurians in the park below. They were learning games from each other and laughing in languages from different worlds. This was what the future looked like. This was what peace between species could create. The golden age of human-Arthurian cooperation had begun. It would last for 20 wonderful years. But like all golden ages, it would not last forever. Changes were coming that no one could predict. The friendship that seemed so strong would be tested in ways that nobody imagined possible. 20 years had passed since the Golden Treaty was signed. The world still looked peaceful on the surface, but something was changing. General Seok Jin-han noticed it first when he reviewed the military budget reports. More money was being spent on weapons than ever before. The official papers called it defensive modernization, but he knew better. The New Earth Coalition government had different ideas about aliens than the old leaders. President Myung-ho Kang spoke in public about protecting human independence. He said humanity had become too dependent on Arthurian help. He worried that humans were forgetting how to take care of themselves. In private meetings, the new leaders said different things. They talked about how the Arthurians controlled too much of Earth's technology. They owned the power plants and the medical facilities. They ran the space programs and the terraforming projects. What would happen if they decided to leave Earth? Or worse, if they decided to take over? Dr. Min Seo-song still worked at the Joint Research Center, but things felt different now. New security guards walked through the hallways every day. They wore uniforms and carried weapons. They said they were there to protect everyone, but their eyes watched the Arthurian scientists more than anyone else. The research projects were being divided up in strange ways. Human scientists were moved to separate buildings from their Arthurian partners. The official reason was better organization, but Dr. Song knew it was really about separation. The government wanted to make sure humans could work without alien help. Her Arthurian colleague Velnara had worked beside her for 15 years. They had discovered amazing things together about how life worked in the universe. But now they could only meet during official scheduled times. Velnara asked her why things were changing, but Dr. Song did not know what to tell him. The propaganda started slowly at first. News programs began talking about Arthurian influence in human society. They asked questions about whether aliens should have so much control over human technology. They wondered if the partnership was really equal, or if humans were becoming junior partners in their own world. Commissioner Hae-in Choi ran the new information ministry. Her job was to make sure the public understood the truth about the alien situation. The truth as the government saw it was that humans needed to become more independent. They needed to learn to stand on their own feet without always relying on alien help. The news shows started featuring stories about human achievements before first contact. They reminded people that humans had built great cities and invented amazing things long before any aliens arrived. They said humans were naturally smart and creative. They did not need alien teachers to tell them what to do. At the same time, other stories appeared about problems in alien-controlled facilities. A power plant had a small accident. A medical center had a computer error. A space station had mechanical trouble. Each story alone seemed minor, but together they painted a picture of alien technology being unreliable. Captain Tae-young Lim commanded the security forces around the Althurian embassy. He had been chosen for the job because of his excellent record and his loyalty to Earth. But the new orders he received made him uncomfortable. He was told to watch the aliens more carefully and report on everything they did. The Althurians in the embassy were starting to notice the changes too. They saw the new barriers being built around their building. They were told the barriers were for their protection, but they looked more like prison walls. Visitors who used to come freely to see them were now turned away by guards. Ambassador Veltar tried to schedule meetings with President Kang, but was told that new diplomatic procedures required all communication to go through government offices first. The meetings that did happen were formal and cold. The friendship that had existed for 20 years seemed to be disappearing. Director Young Sik No oversaw the transition of alien-controlled facilities to human management. He told everyone, this was about building human capability and independence. The Althurians who had run these facilities for years were moved to advisory positions. Their access to critical systems was reduced for security reasons. The changes were presented as temporary measures, while humans learned to operate the complex systems themselves. But the Althurians began to worry that they were being pushed out of the partnership they had helped create. Some of them talked about returning to their home worlds if they were no longer wanted on Earth. Dr. Yoon Ji Choi watched the medical research programs being restructured. The alien scientists who had taught her everything about advanced medicine were being moved to separate laboratories. They could still work, but only under human supervision. Their research was reviewed by committees who did not understand the science as well as they did. The worst part was how the public began to change their attitude toward the Althurians. People who had once welcomed them as saviors now looked at them with suspicion. Children who had grown up playing with alien friends were taught in school that humans and aliens were fundamentally different. Engineer Dong Hyun-yoon continued working on the Mars terraforming project, but now he had to submit reports about his Althurian colleagues. The government wanted to know what the aliens were doing and saying. They wanted to know if the aliens were sharing all their knowledge or if they were keeping secrets. The questions made no sense to Dong Hyun. The Althurians had always shared everything freely. They had taught humans things that took them thousands of years to learn. They had never asked for anything in return except friendship, but now friendship was being treated as if it might be dangerous. New laws were passed that restricted Althurian movement on Earth. They had to register with local authorities wherever they went. They needed permits to travel between cities. They were required to report their activities to government offices. The laws were called the Alien Registration and Monitoring Act. The Althurians complied with all the new rules because they did not want to cause problems. They hoped that if they followed every law perfectly, the humans would remember that they were friends. They did not understand that the laws were designed to make them look dangerous and suspicious. Public opinion polls showed that most humans still supported the partnership with the Althurians. But the numbers were dropping slowly as more stories appeared about alien influence and alien control. Fear was a powerful tool, and the new government was using it carefully and effectively. Dr. Jae-hoon Yoo studied how public attitudes were changing. He wrote papers warning that humanity was making a terrible mistake. He said the fear of aliens was based on lies and misunderstandings. He warned that pushing away their best friends in the galaxy would lead to disaster, but his papers were not published in the major journals anymore. The editors said they were too political. The government said they were dangerous to human security. Dr. Yu realized that telling the truth about the aliens was becoming a crime. The Althurian home government sent messages asking about the changes on Earth. They were concerned about their people living among humans. They offered to help resolve any misunderstandings. They suggested that representatives from both species meet to discuss the problems. President Kang replied that Earth was going through a period of adjustment. He said humans needed time to develop their own independence. He promised that the partnership would continue, but in a new form that better reflected human sovereignty. The Arthurians did not understand what sovereignty meant in this context. The Golden Age was ending, but most people did not realize it yet. The changes happened so slowly that each one seemed reasonable by itself. New security measures, better organization, more human independence. Each step seemed logical until you looked back and saw how far they had traveled from friendship toward something much darker. The Arthurians who had saved humanity from extinction were now being treated as potential threats. The beings who had shared their most precious knowledge were being watched like criminals. The friends who had asked for nothing but given everything were being pushed away by the very people they had saved. But this was only the beginning. The new government had much bigger plans for dealing with the alien situation. Plans that would shock the galaxy when they were finally revealed. Plans that would turn Earth's greatest triumph into its most shameful secret. The night raids began without warning. Colonel In-ho Park led the special forces teams that moved through every major city on Earth at exactly the same time. They surrounded Arthurian homes and workplaces and community centers. The operation was called Protective Custody, and it happened so fast that nobody could prepare for it. Dr. So-young Park woke up to the sound of helicopters flying over her house. She looked out her window and saw bright lights shining on the Arthurian Research Center across the street. Soldiers in black uniforms were leading her alien colleagues out of the building and putting them into large trucks. She grabbed her phone and tried to call Dr. Minseo Song, but the call would not go through. She tried to call the police, but they said they could not help her. She tried to call the news stations, but nobody answered. All the phone lines to people who worked with aliens had been cut. On television, President Myung-ho Kang spoke to the nation from his office. He said that government intelligence services had discovered evidence of an alien plot against humanity. He said the Arthurians were planning to take over Earth and make humans into their slaves. He said the protective custody was necessary to prevent a terrible war. The evidence was classified for national security reasons. The public could not see the proof, but they were told to trust their government. The president said that experts had studied the alien communications and found hidden messages about invasion plans. He said humanity had been betrayed by the very beings they had trusted most. Dr. Yoon-ji Choi watched the news in shock. She had worked with Arthurian doctors for 25 years. She knew them as gentle beings who cared about all forms of life. The idea that they would hurt anyone was impossible to believe. But the president sounded so serious and confident that some people began to doubt what they knew. The processing centers were built in remote areas far from major cities. Administrator Kyung-hwan Oh ran the largest facility in the desert outside of Phoenix. The official name was Temporary Alien Housing Complex, but it looked more like a prison with high walls and guard towers and electric fences. The Arthurians were transported in groups of 50 or 100 at a time. They were allowed to bring only small personal items with them. Their homes and workplaces were sealed off for security investigations. Their bank accounts were frozen to prevent them from funding resistance activities. Inside the processing centers, the aliens were given identification numbers and photographed and fingerprinted. They had to answer hundreds of questions about their activities on Earth and their connections to other Arthurians. The questions were designed to find evidence of the conspiracy that the government claimed existed, but no evidence was found because no conspiracy existed. The Arthurians answered every question honestly. They opened their personal communications for inspection. They provided detailed records of everything they had done on Earth. All they had ever done was help humans and try to be good friends. Engineer Dong Hyun-yoon was ordered to report to a government office 3 days after the raids. Intelligence officers asked him about his work with Arthurian colleagues on the Mars project. They wanted to know if the aliens had access to military information or strategic resources. The questions made him angry because they showed how little the questioners understood about the work. The Mars terraforming project was about creating life, not destroying it. The Arthurians had shared their most advanced knowledge to help humanity spread to other worlds. They had given humans the keys to the galaxy. But when he tried to explain, The officers wrote down that he was being defensive about alien influence. When he said the Althurians were his friends, they wrote down that he might be compromised by emotional attachment. Everything he said was twisted to fit the story the government wanted to tell. The news media began broadcasting stories about what they called alien infiltration. They showed old videos of Althurians working in human facilities, but now described their work as espionage. They said the aliens had been studying human weaknesses and preparing for invasion. Former government officials appeared on talk shows to discuss the alien threat. They claimed they had always been suspicious of Althurian motives but had been silenced by previous administrations. They said the protective custody operation had saved humanity from certain destruction. Dr. Jae-hoon Yoo tried to publish research showing that the conspiracy theories were false. His data proved that Althurians had only helped humans and never harmed anyone. But scientific journals refused to print his papers. Editors said they could not publish anything that contradicted national security findings. Some brave people tried to protest the treatment of the aliens. They gathered in parks and outside government buildings holding signs that said the Althurians were innocent. But police broke up the protests and arrested anyone who spoke out too loudly. Protesting alien detention became illegal under the National Security Emergency Act. Captain Tae-young Lim was put in charge of security at one of the processing centers. He had known many of the Althurians personally from his years protecting the embassy. Seeing them behind electric fences made him feel sick, but he was told this was his duty to humanity. The aliens asked him why they were being held. They said they had done nothing wrong. They asked when they would be allowed to go home. Captain Lim had no answers for them because he had not been told the truth either. He was just following orders like everyone else in the security forces. Inside the processing centers, life was hard, but not impossible. The Althurians were given basic food and shelter and medical care. They were allowed to talk to each other and practice their religion and maintain their culture. The government wanted to avoid accusations of cruelty or abuse, but they were not allowed to leave. They could not contact their friends or colleagues on the outside. They could not communicate with their home worlds. They were cut off from everything they had built during their years on Earth. Their lives were put on hold while the government decided what to do with them. The Althurian home government sent urgent messages demanding to know what had happened to their people. Earth's leaders replied that the aliens were being held for their own safety, while security investigations continued. They said releasing them too soon might put them in danger from angry humans who felt betrayed. The investigation would take as long as necessary to ensure complete safety. No timeline was given for when it might be finished. The implication was clear that the Althurians might be held indefinitely while the government figured out their next move. Public opinion was divided but leaning toward supporting the government action. Fear was a powerful motivator, and most people decided it was better to be safe than sorry. If there was even a small chance that the aliens were dangerous, then protective custody seemed reasonable. The few humans who had worked closely with Althurians knew the truth, but they were afraid to speak out. Some had been questioned by intelligence officers and warned that their loyalty to humanity was in doubt. Others had lost their jobs or been transferred to different departments. The message was clear that defending aliens would destroy their careers. Dr. So-young Park tried to visit her old research partner Vel Nara at the processing center, but was turned away at the gate. She was told that contact with detainees was prohibited for security reasons. She could send letters, but they would be read by censors first. Any communication about the detention would be blocked. 6 months passed and the temporary detention became permanent. New laws were passed giving the government authority to hold aliens indefinitely during national security emergencies. The emergency was extended every 90 days with no end date specified. The processing centers became small cities with their own routines and hierarchies. The Althurians adapted as best they could to their imprisonment. They taught their children and cared for their sick and tried to maintain hope that someday they would be free again. But freedom was not what the government had planned for them. The detention was just the first step in a much larger plan. A plan that would use the aliens in ways that nobody could imagine. A plan that would turn humanity's greatest friends into their most valuable resources. 2 years had passed since the night raids and the world was facing a crisis nobody wanted to talk about. Director Sang-Min Kang sat in his office reviewing reports that made him feel sick. Earth's power systems were failing. Medical supplies were running out. The Mars colonies were sending desperate messages asking for help that nobody could provide. The problem was simple but terrible. Humans had relied on Althurian knowledge and workers for so long that they had forgotten how to do things themselves. The aliens had maintained the fusion reactors that powered cities. They had operated the machines that made medicine. They had run the systems that kept space colonies alive. Now those aliens were locked away in detention centers and humans could not replace them. The technology was too complex. The knowledge was too advanced. Every day more systems broke down and could not be repaired properly. Every day the crisis got worse. President Myung-ho Kang called an emergency meeting of his closest advisors. They gathered in a secret room deep underground where nobody could hear what they were saying. The topic was too dangerous to discuss in public. The solution they were considering would shock the world if anyone found out. The Resource Management Council had prepared a proposal that seemed logical on paper. The detained Althurians had special knowledge that Earth desperately needed. Their bodies were stronger and more capable than human bodies. Why not use them to solve the crisis while keeping them safely contained? Dr. Jae-hoon Yu was brought in to study the biological capabilities of different Althurian types. He had become a government consultant despite his earlier protests about alien treatment. The alternative was losing his research funding and his career. He told himself he could help both species by making the work assignments as humane as possible. His research divided the Althurians into categories based on their physical and mental abilities. Some were better at working with energy systems. Others had natural talents for manufacturing complex chemicals. A few had the rare ability to survive in dangerous environments that would kill humans instantly. The first work programs began quietly at facilities far from public view. Small groups of Althurians were brought from detention centers to operate critical systems. They were told this was temporary work that would help their cases for eventual release. They were promised better living conditions and contact with their families. Supervisor Woo Jin Kim ran the largest work facility outside Denver. 3,000 Althurians worked there in shifts to maintain the power grid for the western United States. They lived in dormitories near the reactors and were transported to work sites under heavy guard. But they were allowed to keep their families together and practice their customs. The Althurians worked without complaint because they hoped cooperation would prove their loyalty to humanity. They maintained systems that humans could no longer operate alone. They solved problems that human engineers could not figure out. They prevented disasters that would have killed millions of people. The economic benefits were immediate and impressive. Power shortages ended. Medical production returned to normal levels. The Mars colonies stopped sending emergency requests for help. Government officials began to see the work program as the solution to all their problems with alien integration. But the success created a new problem. The temporary work assignments became permanent necessities. Earth's economy now depended completely on alien labor to function. Without the Althurians working in the background, human civilization would collapse in weeks. The detention that was supposed to be temporary had become absolutely essential. Engineer Dong-hyun Yoon was assigned to design better facilities for alien workers. He told himself he was making their lives more comfortable by building proper housing and workspaces. But deep inside, he knew he was really designing better prisons that would keep valuable workers contained more efficiently. The new facilities looked almost like normal cities from the outside. They had homes and schools and recreational areas. The Althurians could live with their families and raise their children. They could worship and celebrate and maintain their culture. But they could never leave, and they could never refuse to work. Dr. Min Seo-song was put in charge of monitoring alien health in the work programs. She made sure they received proper food and medical care and rest periods. She convinced herself this was better than leaving them idle in detention centers. At least now they were using their skills and contributing to society. But she could not ignore the truth that the Althurians were essentially slaves. They worked because they had no choice. They were kept alive and healthy only because their labor was valuable. If they ever became unnecessary, they would have no protection at all. The thought kept her awake at night. The work programs expanded rapidly as their success became obvious. More detention centers were converted to work facilities. More Altrurians were assigned to maintain critical infrastructure. The government began planning even larger projects that would require thousands more alien workers. Captain Tae-young, Lim oversaw security at multiple facilities. He watched the same beings who had once been honored guests at diplomatic dinners now working as unpaid laborers under armed guard. Many of them still recognized him and asked when they would be allowed to return to their normal lives. He had no answer because there was no plan for their release. The work had become too important to Earth's survival. The government had trapped itself in a system that required permanent alien labor to function. Freedom for the Altrurians would mean economic collapse for humanity. Public opinion about the work programs was mixed when people learned about them at all. Most humans never saw the facilities or the alien workers. The media presented the programs as rehabilitation efforts that helped detained aliens contribute positively to society while learning human values. The few protesters who demanded better treatment for the aliens were dismissed as unrealistic idealists who did not understand the complexity of the situation. How could they release beings who might still be dangerous? How could they waste valuable skills that were keeping human civilization alive? Some Altrurians in the work programs began to understand that they would never be free. They had been tricked into believing that cooperation would lead to release. Instead, their cooperation had made them more valuable as permanent workers. The better they performed their jobs, the less likely they were to ever leave. A few tried to work more slowly or make small mistakes that would reduce their value, but the supervisors quickly identified these attempts at resistance. The punishments were not violent, but they were effective. Reduced food rations for families, separation from children, transfer to more dangerous work assignments. The message was clear that cooperation was the only way to protect their loved ones. The Altrurians had to choose between their own freedom and their family's safety. Most chose to keep working and hope that someday humans would remember the friendship they had once shared. Dr. Yoonji Choi visited one of the work facilities to provide medical training to alien workers. She saw Altrurians who had once been her respected colleagues now wearing identification numbers and living behind fences. They still treated her with kindness and asked about her family and her research. The contrast between their dignity and their circumstances made her feel ashamed. These beings had saved her world and taught her everything she knew about advanced medicine. Now they were being used as unpaid laborers to maintain the very systems they had helped create. The injustice was so obvious that ignoring it required constant mental effort, but like everyone else involved in the system, she found ways to justify what was happening. The work kept the aliens healthy and active. It prevented them from becoming depressed or hopeless. It showed them that they still had value in human society, even if they could not be completely free. The truth was simpler and more horrible. Humanity had discovered that slavery was more profitable than friendship. The beings who had given them the stars were now being used to maintain the systems that kept human civilization running. And there was no plan to ever let them go. The work programs would continue to expand. More facilities would be built. More aliens would be put to work. The temporary emergency measures had become the permanent foundation of Earth's economy. Humanity had found a way to have their cake and eat it too. But this was not the end of the story. The government had even darker plans for their alien population. Plans that would make the work programs look merciful by comparison. Plans that would cross lines that could never be uncrossed. General Hee-soo Kim received the classified report on a cold morning in February. The intelligence data was terrifying and clear. Long-range sensors had detected a massive Althurian fleet moving toward Earth. The estimated arrival time was 14 months. The size of the fleet suggested this was not a diplomatic mission, but a rescue operation. The War Cabinet met in the deepest bunker beneath the capital city. President Yoon Young-no looked around the table at faces that showed the same fear she felt in her heart. For 40 years they had been telling themselves that the Altrurian home government believed their people were safe and happy on Earth. Now that lie was about to be exposed. Defense Minister Chang Ho Park presented the military analysis with shaking hands. The approaching fleet carried weapons technology that had advanced far beyond what Earth remembered from 40 years ago. Human defenses would not last more than a few hours against such firepower. Fighting was not an option. Neither was negotiation. The third option was the one nobody wanted to discuss but everyone was thinking about. If the rescuing Altrurians found no evidence of their people on Earth, they might assume the missing population had moved elsewhere. If all traces of the work programs and detention centers could be eliminated, the truth might never be discovered. Dr. Bai provided the scientific assessment that made the terrible decision possible. Altrurian biology included unique organ systems that could be removed and preserved after death. These organs could continue functioning for decades if properly maintained. Combined with advanced computer systems, they could operate all the critical infrastructure without requiring living Altrurians. The room fell silent as the implications became clear. They could solve two problems with one solution. The approaching rescue fleet would find no evidence of their missing people. Earth would continue to have the alien technology needed to maintain their civilization. All it required was crossing, a line that had never been crossed before in human history. The vote was taken in secret with no official record kept. Every cabinet member agreed that the survival of humanity was more important than the lives of their alien workers. The implementation would begin immediately and be completed before the rescue fleet arrived. The operation was given the code. Final Integration Administrator Kyung-Hwan Oh was put in charge of the technical aspects. He had run detention centers and work facilities for years. Now he was asked to design something much more complex. The aliens had to be eliminated, but their biological functions had to be preserved and integrated into permanent systems. The medical facilities were built in underground complexes far from any population centers. Dr. Jae-hoon Yu led the team that would harvest and preserve the alien organs needed to keep critical systems running. He told himself he was saving human civilization, but the work made him vomit every morning before he went to his laboratory. The process was designed to be as efficient as possible. The Altrurians would be told they were being moved to new facilities, with better conditions. They would be given sedatives during transport to keep them calm. They would never know what was happening to them. Their suffering would be minimal, and their sacrifice would save billions of human lives. Engineer Dong Hyun-yoon designed the integration systems that would connect preserved alien organs to the computers that ran power plants and factories and space stations. The biological components would provide the advanced processing power that human technology could not match. The artificial intelligence would handle routine operations while the living tissue solved complex problems. The first facility began operations 6 months before the rescue fleet was scheduled to arrive. Supervisor Woo-jin Kim oversaw the transition of 3,000 alien workers from the Denver complex. They were told they were being relocated to a new facility on the East Coast that would be more comfortable for their families. The Altrurians boarded the transport vehicles willingly. They had learned over the years that cooperation was the only way to protect their loved ones. Some of them seemed excited about the possibility of better living conditions. Others were suspicious, but had no choice except to comply with the orders they were given. Dr. Min Seo-song monitored the medical procedures to ensure they were performed correctly. The sedatives worked quickly and the aliens felt no pain during the harvesting process. Their organs were removed and placed in preservation chambers, while their bodies were disposed of in cremation facilities that left no trace of their existence. The preserved organs were connected to computer systems and began operating critical infrastructure within hours. The fusion reactors continued running smoothly. The medical production facilities maintained their output levels. The space colonies received the support they needed. From a technical standpoint, the integration was perfectly successful. Captain Tae-young Lim supervised the destruction of all evidence that aliens had ever lived and worked on Earth. The detention centers were demolished, and the land was restored to its natural state. The work facilities were converted to fully automated operations that appeared to run on advanced human technology. Records were altered to remove any mention of alien workers or alien knowledge. The process continued for 8 months until every Altrurian on Earth had been eliminated and integrated into the systems they had once operated while alive. 43,000 beings who had come to save humanity had been turned into permanent biological components of human civilization. Their bodies were gone, but their organs continued serving the people who had murdered them. 3 months before, the rescue fleet arrived. The final preparations were completed. Fake historical records were created showing that the missing Altrurians had chosen to establish independent colonies in distant star systems. Video messages were produced using artificial intelligence to show happy aliens describing their new lives far from Earth. Shipping manifests were fabricated to document the resources humanity had supposedly provided for these colonization efforts. Financial records were created showing the enormous investments Earth had made in supporting their alien friends. Every detail was designed to convince the rescuers that their people had simply chosen to live elsewhere. Admiral Kethvar arrived in the Sol system to find a thriving human civilization spread across multiple worlds. The technology was impressive, and the cities were beautiful. Earth's representatives, led by Ambassador Hyun-Soo-jung, welcomed the Altrurian visitors with apparent joy and offered complete cooperation with their investigation. The documentation provided by the humans was thorough and convincing. The video, messages from the supposed colonists, seemed authentic. The financial records showed generous support for the colonization projects. When specific individuals were mentioned, the humans expressed sadness that communication was difficult due to the vast distances involved. Dr. So Young Park now served as Director of Interspecies Relations. She guided the Altrurian investigators through facilities where her people had supposedly worked alongside humans for decades. The fusion reactors and medical centers operated flawlessly, demonstrating the lasting benefits of the partnership that everyone claimed had existed. The integration. Systems worked perfectly during the inspection. The preserved alien organs provided the processing power needed to maintain complex operations, while the computer interfaces made everything appear to be advanced human technology. The investigators found no evidence that living aliens had ever been involved in running these systems. Some members of the rescue fleet expressed doubts about certain inconsistencies in the records. A few requested direct communication with specific individuals they had known personally, but Admiral Kethvar concluded that the evidence supported the human claims about voluntary colonization and peaceful separation. The investigation lasted 4 months. During that time, the Altrurian visitors were treated with respect and shown every courtesy. They were given complete access to any records they requested. They were allowed to inspect any facility they chose. They found nothing that contradicted the story they were told. The rescue fleet departed with formal thanks for humanity's care of their missing people. They carried digitized messages for the colonists and gifts intended to help with their distant settlements. They promised to maintain friendly relations with Earth and invited human visitors to their homeworlds. Behind them, they left a civilization built on the greatest crime in galactic history. Every light that shone in human cities was powered by the preserved organs of murdered aliens. Every medicine that saved human lives was produced by biological systems harvested from beings who had trusted their killers. Every ship that traveled between the stars was guided by the living tissue of creatures who had given humanity the gift of space travel. The final irony was complete. The Altrurians had been destroyed by the very knowledge and generosity they had shared with humanity. Their advanced biology had made their enslavement possible. Their trust had made their murder easy. Their own rescue fleet had been deceived by technology that incorporated their harvested remains. Humanity's greatest achievement was built on the foundation of those who had saved them from extinction. The beings who had asked for nothing but friendship had been repaid with betrayal and death. Their bodies were gone, but their organs would continue powering human civilization for centuries to come. The universe would never know the truth. The survivors would never learn what had happened to their missing people. The crime would remain hidden forever beneath the prosperity and progress of a species that had chosen survival over honor. The helpers had been helped to their graves, and their killers had inherited the stars. Dr. Yoonji Choi stood in her laboratory looking at the medical systems that kept millions of humans healthy and alive. Somewhere inside those machines were organs that had once belonged to beings she had called friends. They continued their work, even in death, serving the people who had murdered them. She tried not to think about it, but the knowledge was always there. Every miracle of human medicine was powered by the harvested biology of innocent aliens. Every advancement in human science was built on the foundation of galactic genocide. Every achievement of human civilization was stained with the blood of their greatest benefactors. This was humanity's true face. Not the noble explorers reaching for the stars, but the species that had repaid salvation with slavery and friendship with murder. They had been helped once by beings greater than themselves and had repaid that help in the most unthinkable way possible. The stars looked down on Earth and saw a world of monsters wearing the masks of heroes. But the masks would never slip, and the truth would never be told. The greatest crime in the history of the galaxy would remain forever hidden beneath the glow of human prosperity.